beings, and welcome to this episode of the Funk Chop. Today, the recipe card is chocolate cake. And also, just a heads up, the hair ornament is whisk, because the greater the whisk, the greater the reward. So let's talk about chocolate for a moment. Main ingredient in this cake. Chocolate, do you know the cocoa beans? They grow only 30 degrees north or south of the equator, so only in warm places, and where the beans grow hugely affects how they taste. If you've ever done a chocolate tasting, all the different regions have a very different flavor kind of chocolate. I highly recommend getting your hands on some chocolate from some different parts of the world and giving it a taste. You can really see the difference. So for today, this chocolate that we're using, or the cocoa powder, which is basically they take the cocoa beans and they take the fat out of them, and that's actually the cocoa butter is the fat, which is, they put it back together when they make chocolate, but for this it's just the dry powder. Dutch process is just that process of how they take the fat out and how long they process it for. There's another kind of cocoa powder too that I use sometimes, and it's called Blackshire cocoa, and that's what they use in Oreo cookies. It's very dark and it has quite an earthy, deep, smooth, kind of smoky taste to it, I think. I love it so much. And just, you could even do a bit of a mixture. It's harder to find. I get it at Galloway's, a health food store around here. But for this, we're using just regular Dutch process. And just a little tip too, if you've ever researched this stuff, depending on what kind of cocoa powder you use, it has a different interaction with what leavening agent you use. So baking powder or baking soda. So if you're following a recipe that calls for cocoa powder, really stick to what they're recommending. So for this Dutch processed, you need something to make it sweet, because you know it can never be too sweet. Sugar, just regular sugar. You need flour, of course. This recipe is not gluten-free. There's a different chocolate cake recipe I'm going to make, but this one you need regular flour, because the way the moisture is in this one, you have to have some gluten that binds it together. It's a very moist chocolate cake. So you need just a regular all-purpose flour. You need some almond milk or any kind of non-dairy beverage. I actually usually prefer soy, because the profile of soy, the fat content in relation to protein and sugars is quite similar to regular dairy milk. Usually I use soy, but for this I'm using almond milk because it's what I have on hand. So some almond milk, and you'll see we're gonna mix some vinegar, that acidity that we need when we're doing vegan baking. So apple cider vinegar too. You need some applesauce. Applesauce adds texture. It also adds some moisture. So we're gonna use some unsweetened applesauce. You need baking powder and baking soda, a bit of vanilla, some fat to make it also moist, so we need some oil, and also you're going to need a cup of hot water. Some things you can add, which I really highly recommend to chocolate cake, is a bit of instant espresso powder, like instant coffee powder. That rounds out the taste of the chocolate and makes it even more delicious, I believe. You don't taste the coffee. It just makes the chocolate taste better. And also cinnamon. Cinnamon adds something very delicious to chocolate, and you don't need very much of it, but just a little sprinkling, it adds a bit of depth. So those are two things. And we could also talk about other things you could add into your chocolate cake to make it even more, well, to give it more texture. Things like nuts. You could add hazelnuts or peanut butter, not peanut butter, but peanuts with chocolate, pecans, walnuts, of course, coconut. You could add in some little sprinklings of fruit too. Bits of strawberry. You just gotta be careful about fruit that has a lot of moisture in it, because we don't want to add too much more moisture to this cake. But you could add dried things, some dried fruits. Why not? It's your cake. You can have your cake and eat it too, you know. So I'm gonna get to some mixing and show you how we make this delicious, moist, plant-based chocolate cake. Some tips about mixing. Almost all recipes kind of follow a general rule. You mix the dry stuff together like flour, sugar, baking powder, those things, the cocoa powder in this case. You mix the wet things together and then you dump them all together in one bowl. So I'll give you a little tip, something that I usually do with the wet ingredients. For this recipe, you take the almond milk and you add the vinegar to it, and we call it vegan buttermilk. It kind of curdles the almond milk, and that's what we want. So I'll do that in quite a big size bowl. And then I'll add in the applesauce into this, and I'll mix it all together in this so that all the wet things are mixed together nice and smooth. Then we dump that into the dry ingredients, and the very last thing for this recipe, once you've mixed together that applesauce and almond milk mixture with the dry, then you add the hot water. It's the very last thing, and then you just gently kind of ribbon it through before you put it in the pan. Here's something that you should know too if you plan on doing a lot of baking, is how baking powder works. If you overmix baking powder, your baked good is not going to be as fluffy. So as soon as you add your baking powder, you need to be careful not to overmix, because things will just be flatter and more dense. So be careful how much mixing happens and the timing that you add the baking powder with the moisture actually. So if things are dry, when I mix the dry ingredients together, that's okay, but as soon as you add the moisture and start mixing, the baking powder starts to be activated, and so pretty soon after you do that, you just want to mix it until it's combined and then put it right in your pan. You're going to be the most excellent, awesome, expert baker. Good for you. Okay guys, look at this. Look how runny it is. It's quite runny. See that? That's how you want it to be. Very moist, very soupy chocolate cake soup. That's how it needs to be before you put it in the pan. Parchment paper, your chocolate cake soup, here's something else too. When you're putting a cake into a pan, if you want to take the bubbles out, you gotta tap it on the bottom of the pan. So kind of give it a little bit of a wiggle like this, side to side, so that it settles centered. And then a little bit, if you can see, tapping on the bottom, you'll see bubbles start to come out the top. That's what you want. You don't want a whole bunch of big holes in your cake unless you want holy cake. That might be good for some, you know, religious holidays. But for this, tap the bottom of your pan, or even you can tap it on the counter a few times. Sort of drop it on there just gently and see the bubbles come up and out of it. Another tip. Once you've got it leveled and tapped out, make it tap out, take the bubbles, put it in your oven. This one we bake it for I think 30 minutes. If in a 9x13 pan, that's what I'm making, you bake it at 350 degrees for 30 to 35 minutes. So you gotta check it, stick a toothpick in it, and if the toothpick comes out dry, but even that I don't find very accurate, I kind of poke a hole and sort of part this Red Seas, the chocolate cake way, to see right through into the center. I need to see the center to make sure. So, but that's a general guideline, 30 to 35 minutes at 350 degrees. Here it is, all iced and ready. I added just a little bit of frosting, and also I melted a bit of cherry jam if you wanted to have kind of a black forest cake vibe. Some roasted hazelnut sprinkled on top would be amazing to this too. Vegan, chocolatey deliciousness on a plate. If you want some, come over.